Welcome, everyone, to my second episode of Coffee with Kevin. Got great response from the first episode, so thank you very much for all that viewed it and also provided comments and feedback. And yeah, it was great success. So I'm excited to bring this second episode. This episode is going to go a little more technical. We're going to look at an aspect in the GRC area of ServiceNow called confidential records, something that came out in San Diego that I think is pretty valuable and kind of a small feature that doesn't really get highlighted a whole lot. But I wanted to take you through it. So I'll have that up for you right now. Just grab my cup of coffee here and take a sip with me. I got the nice half calf decaf again here, and I got a full cup right now. Get me through. So next episode after this one, we're going to go back to a couple business topics that have come up that people have asked me to talk about, and maybe not even necessarily I'll talk about them, but I'll raise the questions and hopefully get some discussion going. It's some topics that are of interest to other people. So I'll come back with some of those episodes next. This one's going to go into confidential records. Like I said, if you're not into the technical, you can skip this one. No hard feelings. But if you'd like to, sit back with that coffee, take a look, and I'll walk you through confidential records in GRC. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the feedback, and keep it coming. Stay caffeinated out there. Okay, confidential records. So one of the big things was I actually saw a quick little demo on this online, and I wanted to go explore it for myself. And I dove right in, took a look at the issue record, because these are confidential records are enabled across various GRC tables. Issue is one of them. There's many others. There's evidence requests. There's some ESG tables. There's a whole list of tables available on the doc site when it talks about confidential records of where it can actually be enabled. So you can see here, audit task, engagement, evidence request. It also tells you who it's confidential for, who can see it, all that good stuff. So I started saying, oh, great, let's go in and take a look at this, right? I want to go, let's start with an issue, because that was one of the requests I had from a client. So let's take a look at the issue. Well, when I went in to look at it, I didn't see anything that was related to confidential or confidentiality on the form. You can see here there is a tab for confidentiality. However, this was not showing up for me when I first came in. So, of course, I had to go back and read the manual and actually dig in a little bit further. There's actually a GRC property that needs to be set. It's just a checkbox to enable record level confidentiality. One thing to note is when you set this, it cannot be undone. So you really want to think about whether you want this functionality or not, because it's going to be there on these tables now, and you can't undo it because there's a lot of changes that take place actually when you go ahead and enable this. There's some ACLs that get updated, some script includes that now get referenced, etc. We'll go into that a little bit more. But that being said, I wanted to see it, so I went ahead and enabled record level confidentiality. What that did is now on the forms for these tables that are supported, you will now see a tab or a section. I have my sections and tabs. I know I'm not on the latest and greatest next new experience with Polaris and everything, but just bear with me for anyone with that critique. I'm still getting used to that and still using this UI as well. And a lot of clients are actually still on this UI also. So I wanted to kind of put this out there in this UI. So it looks and behaves the same in the latest experience. So, all the functionality is there. So in this confidentiality section, if I click into that, now I actually have a checkbox that I can make this record confidential. So this is how it's handled. So now if I say I want to make this issue record confidential, and I click on that, you'll see that it automatically brought in some people who have access to it. It's pre-populating that, and that's also based on the documentation here. You can show what it pulled in. So different tables will pull in different people from the record. Okay, but you can also modify that by unlocking this field. You can add, remove people, and take access away or give people access. Now, as you do that, notifications save the record. Notifications will be sent to notify people that they're on a confidential record. They may not have access to it, so there may have to be some requests made to get certain roles granted to them. There is a new role called a confidential user role that also gets added to them. That's actually used in some of the ACLs, and I'll show that in a little bit. But it's pretty nice that it goes out and grabs a bunch of different users. You'll see here, looking at the record, Rena, so we got the assigned to, we got the issue manager in there. Gerard Bennett came from somewhere. We'll have to figure out where he came from. Myself, because I'm the one who actually enabled the confidential flag, so by default it wraps me in here as well, and it brings in the groups that are here. If I had an assignment group here, it would bring in that group, but it did bring in my compliance managers group. So Gerard's the only one that's not directly on this record, but what Gerard is, if we look at where this issue came from, and we look at the details, it actually came from a control, and a control test failure. So by looking at that control, we can actually see that Gerard is actually the control owner. So it'll actually reach out and find other people who would be relevant for this issue and bring them in as well, even if they're not directly on this record. So now we have this set as confidential and we have our users here. I'm going to go ahead and make a change for later to show you some functionality where I'm going to actually remove this group. I don't want the whole group to be able to see it. It's something to note that if you put a group in here, everyone within that group, as long as they meet the ACLs of the record, they'll be able to see it. Okay. I'm going to say I don't want all compliance managers to see this even. I only want Carrie to be able to see it as the issue manager and the person in that compliance manager group. So I'm going to restrict this even more. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that group. And now I'm going to save this as a confidential record. It is now flagged as that confidential record. So I know I mentioned notifications earlier. So as I do this and I save that record, some notifications will go out where the confidential users are notified. Okay. And it's going to contain an actual email script. The email script will actually execute and bring in some data. I can show you what that email looks like here. This is the out-of-the-box email. Of course, I haven't modified this, but it shows all the recipients that they were added to a confidential record. They may need to request some access to the record. They can click to the link of the record to go view it and take a look at it. But again, they may need some access. Of course, as you're marking things confidential and whatnot, you could have some flows and flow designer to grant roles automatically and trigger things that way. I've seen a lot of cool functionality built by various developers out there that do things like that, add and remove roles and whatnot. So you could do something like that as well, so they wouldn't have to manually request it. But that's what happens when I make it confidential. Okay, so now that record's confidential. What does that really mean? How much more security did I gain on that? Well, if I look at that issue again, there's only certain users that can see it. Okay. We have this list here. Excuse me. Remember, I removed some of the compliance managers. I removed the group of compliance managers from there. So I'm going to go in as another compliance manager, someone else who's in this group, okay, as an issue manager. And I'm going to go in and see if I can see this record, okay. Without the confidentiality flag, I would be able to see it because these are open to all the compliance managers. So I'm going to go ahead and impersonate another person that I know is in that compliance manager group. Sorry, I meant to grab that issue number 11008. Okay, let's go back in as Mac now and go look for 11008. So Mac is in the compliance managers group, but can you see the record? Let's see if we go look for issues. We look at all open issues, and we're looking for 11008. I'm just going to paginate through here a little bit, see what I can see. And I'm getting close here. I cannot see 11008. Okay, I don't see it in my list, but can I search for it? Let's try this. Okay, let's see if I can bring it up here. I don't get any results for it. So while Mac is still in a compliance manager group, remember we removed that group, so that group cannot see that. Only those very specific users on that confidential record can see that. So now if we go back to the issue, we'll see that there's really only now 1, 2, 3, 4 people that can see this issue. And by enabling this, what it did was it actually updated, or it's now leveraging new ACLs that are there. And the ACLs will actually look for that confidential flag being enabled. It'll look at, are they part of the allowed users? Are they a part of the allowed groups? Some of this is handled directly in the ACL. Some of it's handled in a script include that gets called. So for instance, in this read ACL, you can see how in the answer here, it actually calls out, can read confidential record. So it's looking, does this person have access to be able to read this confidential record if it's a confidential record? There's also a script include out there that handles security as well. And you can see here in the script include, it's now looking at the record as confidential and confidentiality enabled as well. Sorry, I got tripped up on that word. This is going to be a raw video. I'm not going to edit this, so you get all the bloopers as well. So both ACLs that call this script include, all of this is now updated to look for this confidentiality feature. Okay, and that's how they're locking that down. A couple other things they did was they actually created another module called GRC confidential records. In here, you can get to which records are marked. In here, this gives you kind of a good idea of the tables that this is enabled for. In my issues, I have here, and this is the issue I marked as confidential, right? I can still see this issue if I'm Rena and I have access to this issue, or I'm Carrie. I'm part of the in crowd that's allowed to see this confidential record. I can still see it from my issues, all my issues, all open issues, but they've also broken it out here so I can get right to the confidential records. So it's kind of a nice grouping from that aspect. I also have the ability to go back into the issue and remove the confidentiality nature of it if I wanted to, or if it got marked incorrectly, however I wanted to do there. Now, the role, again, there's a new role out here for that confidential user. Very straightforward, pretty self-explanatory of what it is and how it gets granted through you could either do again through the flow or manually add that to different users. Now, when we look at this, you'll see we talked about the tables that it's enabled on out of the box. So, or in the baseline, let's say, we're across risk events, engagements, issues, etc. You can enable this functionality on potentially a custom table that you have. Obviously, it's going to take some configuration for making the ACLs for that table, making the confidential, updating some of the script includes, and so forth. But you can extend this functionality to custom tables that you have in your system to leverage this confidentiality feature. So I think that's also pretty nice. It's not just locked in. You can extend it and you can spread it across the rest of your system where you see fit. I do think they've covered quite a few of the tables that you're probably going to want to use this confidentiality nature at first, but you may have a couple others, and especially if you have some custom applications or custom tables out there, you may be looking deeper there. So while it's a small feature inside of GRC, I think it's pretty powerful from the standpoint of giving a very quick and easy way to lock a record down even further. So remember, all I'm doing is really augmenting the ACL. So even if I am an allowed user on this to see this confidential record, if I don't have access to update any of these fields, meaning if I don't meet the field ACLs for write, or I don't have some of the other ACLs to be able to see the record, I'm not going to be able to. This is really just an augmentation of that. So I still need all of my ACLs and my execution order to happen, but this adds another level to that to make that confidential. So hopefully this was educational. Some of you may have already seen this. I liked it, and it was very poignant because of the fact of having some of our clients ask, okay, is there another way that I can lock things down, hide things from certain prying eyes, really look at something first. Maybe I mark it confidential to really dig into it, and then I realize, okay, this can be seen by more people, and I can have that flexibility rather than having to potentially control that with very strict ACLs and not being able to back yourself back out of it. So again, confidential records, great documentation on what gets pulled in, what tables it's used on, how to actually enable it. Of course, I overlooked that at first, but it's very easy. It's that little checkbox, and it gives you some really powerful functionality. So appreciate sitting with me. Hopefully your coffee's still warm and you can drink it. And again, thank you for another episode of Coffee with Kevin.